Society was wrong. This could be, I guess, a little bit of a controversial topic or maybe ruffle some feathers. But I just had some thoughts here as I'm out on this hike on this beautiful January day and thought I would share. So way back in the 1990s, whenever I was in high school, I remember college was all the rage. It was an expectation that you go to college. I remember all the teachers, my friends' families, everybody was talking college. Where are you gonna go? What are you gonna do? And I was a kid that in college, or in high school rather, I was terrible. I was a terrible student. I barely graduated. I think I graduated with the exact number of credits that you had to have in order to be able to graduate on time. Otherwise, I would have had to go to summer school. And I just barely made it. My grade point average was, man, I don't even know if it was 2% or 2.0, whatever. I don't even know what the proper terminology is. But I think I was somewhere around like 1.7, 1.8. I remember taking the ACT test and being just absolutely, I had no idea what I was doing. So I barely finished high school, and my next step was college. It was what I was being told that I had to do. My next step was expected to be, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I remember at one point, one of my grandpas was asking me, I think this was actually on my high school graduation. He said, "Hey, what's your next step? What are you going to do next?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go to college." And he said, "What for? What are you going to study?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't have any idea. I think maybe criminal justice." And I don't even know why I said that. I wasn't interested in that. But he said, "You ought to think about a trade school." And I just remember back then in the 90s, it seemed like trade schools were like taboo. There was, like, they were almost looked down upon. And it was like a difference between like blue collar and white collar, I guess. And maybe some of that still exists to this day, but hopefully that's turning in the other direction. But I remember dismissing that and being like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to college. I'm going to get a degree. I want to get a desk job or something like that. I wanted to be something a little bit more prestigious. That was my thought back then. Something a little more meaningful. So I went to college, started and stopped, and didn't do well. It took me a while. I think it took me like 8 years to finish a bachelor's degree. But I stuck with it, and I'm glad that I eventually got it. But then I got into a career that I really didn't enjoy. I didn't appreciate it. It ended up paying well. It was essentially just business management, and I did okay. But it was not the path that I should have taken. And now, and all the years since, I've learned that I really enjoy working with my hands a lot more. I did end up leaving that full-time job last year in April of 2025 at 48. Early retired. I don't necessarily like that word, but I am. I consider myself more of a jack of all trades these days. I can do just a little bit of everything, and I'm pretty decent at most things. Spent half the day yesterday working on my daughter's car, giving it a full tune-up. It's Honda Civic with 302,000 miles on it, which is incredible and amazing. And I did a ton of work to it yesterday. Very fulfilling. And I hope that car stays on the road for another 100,000 miles. And I can do all kinds of stuff around the house. I have a YouTube channel, How to Fix a Workshop, where I do a lot of hands-on DIY projects. And, I got none of that from going to college. And so I always think about that question that my grandpa asked me way back when, and suggesting that I ought to go to trade school. And there's times I wish I would have taken his advice. It would have been a different path. Who knows? Who knows which direction that I would have ended up, but I probably would have been something that spoke to me or applied to me more than a desk job and staring at a computer screen all day. But that was just the school part of it. The other things that society encourages you to do, or did back then whenever I was a young adult, was get married, get a house, get some cars, go into debt. I did all those things and I failed at most of them. I actually got married when I was 23, had my first son when I was 23, and bought a house a couple years later, bought cars on loans, had multiple car loans. And the punchline is I ended up divorced and bankrupt and had to start all over by the time I was 30. Luckily, shortly after that, I found the concept of financial independence. Totally turned my lifestyle and choices around. But, just buying a house, that was another one that was maybe not the best advice we were being pushed at the time. Everybody was encouraged to buy a house. Didn't matter what your income was. Didn't matter what your credit was. We'll find a loan for you. I think about nowadays, the interest rates are somewhere in the 6.5%, 7% range, somewhere in there, depending on what your credit score is. And that's about what it was back then in the early 2000s, 25 years ago. And I bought that first house and it was fine. It was a starter home, fixer-upper. But after a couple years, it was like keeping up with the Joneses. My friends were getting nicer homes, so we had to get a bigger home. Family was growing, need more space. 3-bedroom house isn't big enough. So we ended up buying a bigger home that we couldn't afford. They gave us the loan for it. They actually gave us 2 separate mortgages, which just seems ridiculous. It was like predatory. We had 2 separate loans, 2 separate mortgages for this property because we didn't fit the criteria to be able to have, I guess, the right income or the right credit score or whatever it was back then. So they gave us one mortgage for like 80%, the other mortgage was for 15%. And then we put 5% down, which I think came from the sale of our first house. And once things went south with the marriage, we couldn't afford it, and it wouldn't sell back in 2007. So that went into foreclosure. And then shortly after that, I had to file for bankruptcy because we were just so in debt. Car loans, credit cards, medical debt, student loans. Of course, student loans you can't forgive in bankruptcy. You don't find that out until you're in that situation. But thankfully, wiped all that clean. Took a long time to dig out of that. And I hope that nowadays, there's a different message that's being shared. One that doesn't push towards getting into a ton of consumer debt. And one that isn't pushing for going to college, even though it might not be the best route for the individual. Maybe exploring other opportunities. There's so many different opportunities with online work and just trade school. I mean, we hear all the time that there's such a shortage of tradespeople. So hopefully that's something that's starting to turn around. And then housing, I don't know, that one still kind of seems to be one that is a struggle, where there's an emphasis on getting the most house that you can possibly afford and then buying more, building bigger, moving up as soon as you can afford it, or maybe even before you can afford it. And I think that's unfortunate, because we don't need all the space that we have in most cases. Thankfully, whenever I went through that foreclosure of the other house and then eventually remarried, we got a smaller house together, one that was more appropriate for our family size and cheaper for mortgage. We paid it off early, and we still live in it. And it's more than enough house for the 2 of us now. Someday we might downsize even further, so we have a lot of equity. But I don't know, those are just thoughts that were going through my mind as I was taking this hike. It's a pretty nice day in January. It's 41 degrees or so this afternoon, and the next 10 days or so look like they're going to be absolutely freezing. lots of snow coming our way and just bad weather. So got to get in some outdoor activity while I can. Anyway, I'm Josh. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or thoughts or suggestions or anything like that, please leave me a comment down below. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.